Have you ever wondered how small actions can change an entire destiny? How a simple act of kindness can open doors to unimaginable blessings? Today, I'm going to tell you a story that might change the way you see life. In a small village forgotten by time, 3 brothers lived together. They had been orphaned at a young age and had learned to survive with the little they had. Their home was modest, with wooden walls worn down by the years and a roof that barely withstood the rain. To many, poverty was a burden, but each of them viewed life differently. The eldest, Abel, believed the world was unfair. He would say that no one had ever helped him, so he saw no reason to be generous to others. Over the years, his heart hardened, and he began to think only of himself. The middle brother, Elias, was clever and knew that sometimes helping others could bring rewards. However, his kindness wasn't genuine. He gave only when he expected something in return, calculating every gesture as if life were a grand business deal. The youngest, Samuel, saw life differently. Despite their struggles, he always believed that true kindness, given from the heart, would somehow come back around. He shared the little he had, even if it meant being left with nothing. Then, fate presented them with a test that would change their lives forever. One day, a beggar arrived in the village. Dressed in rags, his face covered in dust, and his eyes filled with exhaustion, he knocked on the brothers' door, asking for food and shelter. What they didn't know was that this beggar was far more than he appeared to be. He wasn't there by chance. The sun was beginning to set when the beggar, with slow steps and weary eyes, approached the first house. The cold evening wind blew through the dusty streets of the village, and his stomach growled with hunger. With the little strength he had left, he knocked on the door of the eldest brother, Abel. The door creaked as it opened, and Abel, with a stern expression, looked the stranger up and down. The beggar lowered his head humbly and, in a weak voice, pleaded, "Sir, I am hungry and without shelter. Could you spare a piece of bread and a place to rest for the night?" Abel frowned, crossing his arms. He knew he had bread stored away, knew that offering a bit of water and a corner on the porch would cost him nothing. But his hardened heart saw the beggar as a burden, a nuisance. "I barely have enough for myself," he grumbled, trying to shut the door. "Go ask somewhere else." The beggar sighed, murmured a quiet "God bless you," and continued on his way, now even more exhausted. The man then arrived at Elias's house, the middle brother. He knocked on the door and waited. Elias was clever, and when he saw the beggar, he thought for a moment. "Maybe if I help this man, the villagers will see and speak well of me," he reasoned to himself. So, forcing a smile, he said, "Come in, old man. I'll give you a piece of bread." The beggar stepped inside and was given food. But as he ate slowly, Elias watched him impatiently. "You're full now, aren't you? You can leave." The beggar swallowed the last crumb and thanked him, realizing that this generosity was empty. Without another word, he stepped out into the night, while Elias felt satisfied with himself, believing he had made a good trade. Night was beginning to fall when the beggar reached the youngest brother Samuel's house. His home was the simplest of the 3, and the young man had just returned from the fields, tired but smiling. When he heard the knock at the door, Samuel opened it immediately and saw the ragged man, hungry and shivering from the cold. Without hesitation, he took his only piece of bread and his cup of water and handed them to the old man. "I don't have much, sir, but what I do have, I'll share with you. Come in and rest by the fire." The beggar accepted, his eyes welling with tears. He sat near the warmth, and as he watched Samuel care for him without expecting anything in return, a faint smile appeared on his lips. That night, as the three brothers slept, something began to stir in the heavens. The beggar, unseen by anyone, looked up at the stars and whispered, "Now we shall see who truly understands the meaning of kindness." The fate of the three brothers was about to change forever. The next morning, something strange happened in the village. The beggar had vanished without a trace, but three mysterious gifts had been left for the brothers. Each of them found a different object at their doorstep, and their reactions were as revealing as the test they had unknowingly faced. Abel, the eldest brother, opened his door to find a sack full of gold coins. His eyes gleamed with greed, and he clutched the bag tightly, laughing to himself. "Finally! Luck has smiled upon me," he exclaimed. "Now I'll never have to work or rely on anyone ever again." He ran off to the village, eager to flaunt his newfound wealth. Elias, the middle brother, found a sealed parchment marked with a golden crest. Upon opening it, he discovered that he had been appointed the new administrator of the village, a position that granted him power and influence. A satisfied smile spread across his face. "This is a fair reward for my generosity," he told himself. "Now I'll be respected and have everything I ever wanted." Meanwhile, Samuel, the youngest brother, opened his door and found a small golden seed inside a wooden box. He picked up the seed between his fingers and furrowed his brow. It wasn't gold, nor was it power, just a simple seed. But instead of complaining, he smiled. "If God gave me this, there must be a purpose for it," he said. He went out to the field and, with great care, planted the seed in the fertile soil beside his home. Time passed. Abel, with his gold, lived in excess, spending recklessly without thinking of the future. Elias, with his power, grew arrogant, believing himself superior to everyone else. Meanwhile, Samuel tended to the land where he had planted his seed, watering it every day with patience and faith. Time passed quickly in the village, and the fates of the three brothers began to unfold. Abel, now a wealthy man, spent his gold carelessly, never thinking about tomorrow. He bought fine clothes, hosted lavish parties, and mocked those who had once stood by his side. He believed his fortune would never run out. But greed had blinded him. Over time, the coins began to dwindle. His so-called friends, who had only been around for their own gain, disappeared one by one. And before he realized it, he had nothing left. Desperate, he tried to win back his fortune by gambling what little remained, but fate was cruel. In a single night, he lost everything. Without a home, without food, without friends, Abel found himself alone, just like the beggar who had once knocked on his door. Now, he understood what true misery was. Elias, on the other hand, intoxicated by power, became a cold and ruthless man. He demanded respect and obedience from everyone in the village, treating the people with disdain. He used his position for personal gain, forgetting that power is a burden that must be carried with responsibility. But one day, the king sent a new administrator to the village. Elias was removed from his position in a humiliating manner. Without the title he had flaunted, he realized he had never built genuine relationships. Those who once flattered him now turned away, and the man who had once been respected was now ignored. With no money and no status, both Abel and Elias were overcome with despair and regret. Sitting by the side of the road, lost and hopeless, they thought of the beggar. Now, they finally understood what they had done. But was there still hope for them? Meanwhile, Samuel's fate was taking a completely different path. While Abel and Elias watched their fortunes and status crumble, Samuel continued his humble life, filled with gratitude. Every day, he watered the soil where he had planted the small golden seed. Though nothing seemed to happen at first, he never lost heart. "Everything has its time," he would say, with patience and faith. The villagers watched with curiosity, and some even mocked him. "You received so little, and yet you're satisfied?" they asked. But Samuel only smiled and continued tending to the small patch of land, believing that somehow the seed had a purpose. Then, one morning, something extraordinary happened. In the very spot where he had planted the seed, a golden sprout emerged, shining as brightly as the sun itself. Within days, the sprout grew into a magnificent tree, its leaves shimmering like gold and its branches heavy with pure golden fruit. The news spread quickly through the village, and soon, everyone gathered to witness the miracle. The villagers could hardly believe their eyes. Never in the history of the village had such a tree grown there. But Samuel, with the same generous heart as always, never once thought of keeping the blessing for himself. "Let this tree feed the hungry and help those in need," he said, offering its golden fruit to anyone who required aid. And the more fruit was picked and shared, the more the tree continued to produce in abundance. Samuel's true wealth was not just in the gold the tree bore, but in the kindness he spread. Unlike his brothers, who had lost everything to greed and vanity, he used his blessing to do good. The sun was setting when a mysterious man returned to the village. His clothing was no longer tattered rags, but a radiant white robe that shimmered with a soft, gentle light. His presence carried both serenity and authority. Samuel was in the middle of distributing the golden fruit from his tree to those in need when he saw the man approaching. His eyes widened in recognition. "You!" Samuel murmured, realizing that this was the same beggar who had once knocked on his door, hungry and weary. Abel and Elias, standing among the crowd, recognized him too. A wave of shock washed over them. The man smiled, and his voice echoed with a celestial tone. "I was sent to test your hearts. Through me, your choices have revealed who you truly are, and each of you has sealed your own fate." The elder brothers felt a heavy weight in their chests. Abel lowered his head, remembering the day he had turned the beggar away. Elias swallowed hard, recalling his selfish, calculated generosity. "Abel, you received the gold you desired, but you used it selfishly and lost everything. Elias, you were given power, but you used it for your own gain, and so you fell." Neither brother could speak. Everything they had once ignored now stood as judgment against them. Then, the angel turned to Samuel and smiled. "And you, Samuel, you received only a seed. Yet instead of complaining, you planted it with faith and nurtured it with love. Because of that, your blessing multiplied, and you will never know scarcity." The villagers watched in silence, hanging on to every word. The angel continued, "True wealth is not found in gold, but in a generous heart. True power is not in status, but in humility. And the greatest blessing is not in what we receive, but in what we give." Overcome with regret, Abel and Elias fell to their knees. "Is there still hope for us?" Elias asked, his voice trembling. Samuel looked at his brothers with compassion and, without hesitation, reached out his hands to help them up. "There is always a new path for those who truly repent." The angel nodded, pleased. "You have now learned the most valuable lesson: true kindness expects nothing in return." And so, before the eyes of the entire village, the angel vanished into a beam of light, leaving behind a lesson that would never be forgotten. After the angel's departure, the village remained silent for a few moments. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary, something that touched the soul and made them reflect. But no one felt the weight of those words more than Abel and Elias. The two brothers turned to Samuel, who still had the same serene and kind expression. He did not judge them, nor did he look down on them. Instead, his eyes were filled with compassion. And that made the ache in their hearts even deeper. "We were fools," Abel murmured, staring at the ground. "I thought wealth would make me powerful, but it only brought me loneliness." Elias sighed, feeling the same weight. "I sought status and respect, but in the end, I was left with nothing. What do we do now?" Samuel smiled warmly and placed his hands on his brother's shoulders. "You can start over. True change doesn't happen overnight, but it begins the moment we choose to act differently." Tears welled up in the eyes of the elder brothers. For the first time, they felt no shame in being grateful. As the days passed, Abel and Elias committed themselves to rebuilding their lives in a new way. Abel began working honestly, helping those in need instead of thinking only of himself. Elias, in turn, learned to lead by example, with humility rather than arrogance, and he became a man respected, not because of a title, but because of his transformed heart. And Samuel? He remained who he had always been, humble, generous, and faithful to God. His tree continued to grow, and its fruit never stopped feeding those in need. The story of the three brothers teaches us something valuable. Wealth and power without purpose are like sand slipping through our fingers. Only those who act with humility and generosity will ever know true abundance. After all, what good is having much if your heart is empty? And you? How have you handled the blessings you receive? Have you shared them, or have you kept them only for yourself? Remember, true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we give along the way. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Turn on notifications and continue this journey of learning and reflection with us. Stay blessed, and see you in the next reflection.